Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
Welcome to NHL Wraparound for Monday, June 16th, 2025. Vic Morren, along with Neil Smith. The Stanley Cup will be decided this week between the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers. But our special guest today will be that of a team that is aspiring to make that move into that elite spot, if not next season, then the coming seasons. And that will be Anaheim Ducks. And their GM, Pat Verbeek, will be joining us.
And this should be a lot of fun to be with Pat. He played for my team, the New York Rangers, for a year and a half, just after the lockout, the 94 lockout. Was a great player for us. Played on a line with Mark Messier. But I'm anxious to see Pat. Haven't talked to him much since he's become GM of the Anaheim Ducks. But I did get a chance to talk to him now and then when he was the assistant GM of Tampa, and also when he was scouting for the Detroit Red Wings.
I think one of the questions that I'll be curious to hear the answer from him is he's got a club that's got a pretty good mix right now of youth and experience, and more so with the addition of Chris Kreider coming over last week in a trade with the Rangers. But where he sees his club in relation to the teams that he's watching in the Cup Final, and how much more acquisition change that he believes his club needs to elevate into that next level. If not elite, then at least to be a contender in the next season or two.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting. And of course, he'll know his depth chart better than anyone, and will be able to tell us what he feels about his prospects that are in the system and how that is going to give them the impetus as well as these veterans to qualify for the playoffs.
We'll speak with Pat shortly, but first, let's get to three things you need to pay attention to, brought to you by UBS Financial Services, Inc. On Tuesday, the Florida Panthers will look to clinch their second straight Stanley Cup in Game 6 when they host the Oilers. If they are able to do so, either Tuesday or Friday in Game 7, they would become the 9th franchise since the NHL took over the Stanley Cup in 1926-27 to win back-to-back championships, the others being, in no particular order, Toronto, Detroit, Montreal, Philadelphia, the Islanders, Pittsburgh, Tampa, and Edmonton, with the Lightning being the most recent in 2020 and 2021.
And isn't it amazing that 26-27 was also the year that the New York Rangers came into the league? I didn't know that until I looked down just now and saw that 26-27 date. So it'll be interesting to see if Florida can do it. You know, there was a time, Vic, not very long ago, that we wondered if we'd ever see a back-to-back Stanley Cup because the league was that close, and also players were changing teams so often, and they still are. But we have said it before, and I'll say it again, the job that Bill Zito and his management team has done to fortify this team to make it even better than it was last year, regardless of the losses they took through free agency in the summer. The moves he made during the season with Seth Jones and with Brad Marchand have been just perfect, dead-on bullseyes.
The depth of this club, and we had actually spoken about it yesterday. You'd asked whether you thought this 25 team is better than the club last year. And when you look at that third line depth, and we just talked about Marchand in particular, but the reality is that third line of Marchand, Luosterainen, and Anton Lundell would probably be at least the second line on virtually every other team in the NHL.
Anton Lundell has filled in for Sasha Barkov in games when he's been out of the lineup. and done a good job as the number one center. So you've got a guy that can fill in at least at the number one pivot spot regularly out there as a number three. So how strong are you when that's the case?
Well, that depth takes us to item number 2, because Oilers superstars Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl have been in on 11 of the 15 Oiler goals in this series. And now when you go to the other side of that, and you look at the contributions from a lot of the guys that have played on the bottom 6 during this series: Adam Henry, Jeff Skinner, Trent Frederick, Evander Kane, Matthias Janmark, Victor Arvidsson. 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points. The Panthers' third line, which we just spoke about, 8 goals, 8 assists, 16 points.
It's phenomenal, and that's why we're sitting in the spot that they're sitting in, which is theoretically it could have been over by now had things gone a little bit more towards the Panthers. It's not. They're going into Game 6, and they, I would say, are a very strong likelihood that they're going to be able to win their second consecutive Stanley Cup right at home in Sunrise, Florida tomorrow night.
And you notice, like, the top 2 lines aren't even mentioned here, with Barkov, Reinhart, Rodriguez, Verhaeghe, Bennett, Tkachuk. Those names haven't come up anywhere in here, and this third line has 4 times the amount of points as the bottom 6 forwards have managed to accumulate for the Oilers in this series.
Yeah, it has been really phenomenal, really something to look at when you watch this series. You marvel at the Panthers' third line.
If they are to force a 7th game on Friday, these bottom 6 guys have to produce. And that leads us to item number 3. And that is the amount of time that the Panthers have been playing ahead, getting out of the gate quickly. They've outscored the Oilers 11-4 in the first period, 7-0 in games 3, 4, and 5. And we did mention lead time yesterday. We're going to just kind of thin it down a little bit more. The average lead time for this series thus far through 5 games, the Panthers averaging 40 minutes and 1 second of lead time. The Oilers, 6 minutes and 46 seconds. So clearly it's a situation where Edmonton has been chasing games the entire series. And in fact, the Panthers have scored multiple goals in every first period of this series.
It's really incredible that stat you give about the last 3 games, meaning games 3, 4, and 5 of the series, that the Oilers have not scored a first period goal. They've been outscored in the first period 7-0 in the last 3 games is really remarkable. And you talk about what are the Oilers going to have to do to win Game 6 and force Game 7. There it is right there. You can't go another first period with no goals. You've got to strike. You can't keep playing from behind. We talked about this earlier, saying that if one thing that the Oilers have to change is that they can't think that they're going to be able to keep coming from behind and winning games. It's not going to happen. Florida's going to shut it down, and they did do that in Game 5.
And we're going to certainly see if the Panthers have the scent and the killer instinct to really step on the Oilers' throats in Game 6 in a way that they were unable to do in Game 5 in Sunrise last year. And that wraps up 3 things you need to pay attention to, brought to you by UBS Financial Services, Inc.
It is my pleasure to bring in an old friend, a former, I don't know what you call it, teammate of mine, a player that played for the Rangers when I was there that I traded for and was very proud of that trade. Of course, you always know, Vic, the guys that you want on your team because you hate them when they're on another team. And then you know that's who you want on your team. And certainly this is one of them, Pat Verbeek from the Anaheim Ducks, formerly of the Tampa Bay Lightning, and before that, the Detroit Red Wings, and of course, a long and illustrious Hall of Fame career, I think, anyway, for Pat Verbeek. Pat, thanks for joining us from Michigan today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Neil. It's good to be here.
I guess I want to start off with saying that, the playoffs right now, and just to go to that before we go to the Ducks, I mean, if you haven't seen yourself play, if you watch Brad Marchand in these playoffs, I think you see Pat Verbeek playing, because he has just been outstanding.
Yeah, he has been outstanding. I mean, especially at 37 years old, he has been outstanding. I would say, I really like Brad as a player a lot. Like very skilled. He can equally score as well as make plays. And I would say between the two of us, I would say he's a lot more skilled and a better point producer, and he's a heck of a player.
Well, that comes from a guy who got over 1,000 points and more than 500 goals in the NHL. So I don't know about that, but let's talk about your team. Great season this season as far as growth is concerned of the team and the Ducks, and jumping up in the standings. You had a 21-point jump in the standings this year, Pat. You must have been pretty excited about that part of your club.
Yeah, I think there was some growth that needed, with Greg Cronin the first year. With really accountability was lacking, and I think in the group overall, I think there's a lot of discipline that was lacking, and I think bringing in Greg at the time really solidified the accountability and the discipline and the work ethic required to change our group. I think obviously there's younger guys that need examples, and so I tried to bring in guys that played hard and could lead by example. And so, whether it's Alex Killorn, who's won a couple Stanley Cups, or Radko Gudas, who's just a really tough player to play against, I think they were important, and I think they really helped last year's 21-point turnaround. With their leadership, and obviously Greg Cronin, done a really good job as far as instilling the good work habits, the structure needed to play in our zone.
Pat, the move to remove Cronin, replace with Joel Quenneville, we saw a 21-point jump last season, and the team was actually kind of on the outer fringes during the second part of the season of kind of pushing their way into the playoffs. Where do you expect this team to take that next step with the second most winningest coach in NHL history?
Well, I think that the low-hanging fruit on this is really the special teams. I think the special teams that ultimately ended up costing us probably at least 6 wins in the win column. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that could have got us to 92. Is certainly a big difference. Even if we just got to average, it would have been, the middle of the pack. It would have been such a difference maker. And so from my, point of view, I think that was really a thing that can really be vastly improved. I think the other thing that I've mentioned in the past in other interviews is that the goal scoring needs to pick up. And I think our younger guys are starting to understand. They're starting to get to know the league. They're starting to get a handle on things they can and can't do. And I expect, Cutter Gauthier, I expect Leo Carlson, Mason McTavish, and even our young core with Jackson Lacombe and Pavel Mintyukov to really take big strides for us offensively next year.
This is the highest profile coach this franchise has ever had. I mean, by far. I mean, they have had Mike Babcock, who went on to win a cup in Detroit. They have had Randy Carlyle, who did win a cup in Anaheim with the team, but certainly winning 3 Stanley Cups and the amount of winning that Joel has done, there's not been anybody close to that with this franchise. I know you did a lot of homework and all the rest of it in the off season. Did your association with him playing together in Hartford for that 1 year, did that lend itself into the relationship?
Well, actually, I played about 10 games at the end of the season with New Jersey with Joel, and then Joel ended up going to Hartford. And then I think we played at least a couple seasons together, maybe even 3 seasons together, and got to know Joel really well. Obviously, his coaching, it's funny, being in the East, we travel on buses all the time. So we would bus to New York, Jersey, we'd bus to Boston. So even Philadelphia we bust to. And so sitting in the back of the bus all the time, especially after games, you'd always have, you'd have the odd libation from here and there getting back home. And I think we talked hockey. And I think that group that I played with, whether it's Dave Tippett, Mike Liute, Ron Francis, Kevin Dineen, Joel, Al Samuelson, like all those guys went on to be coaches and Ron Francis, obviously a general manager, but we talked hockey all the time. We talked certain strategies. So the one thing that was always, with Joel, very, very sharp mind, sees what's going on continuously. Basically, I would say is the way he has a video camera inside his mind that he can, see the whole thing and process it very quickly. And I think that, being able to do that on the bench is extremely important, and being able to get your head around all of that stuff. And I think just watching him in the past matchups and that sort of thing really led to me, talking to Joel and going after him. And I think that, as you said, relationships are important. And Joel and I have had to, we've kept in touch over the years, and it matters.
We had a situation. It's a funny story. The St. Louis Blues, and I'm friends with Army, of course, as everybody that's been a GM is. I had dinner with Army at the UBS Arena before they played the Islanders, and then I was actually speaking to Ray Barilli after the game, or at some point, maybe it was before the game. And I said, boy, that's shocking that Boston let Monty go, Jim Montgomery. I said, if a team, and I honestly said this, I said it to Ray Barilli, if a team was smart, they'd fire their guy and they'd get him. And sure enough, the next day, and it had nothing to do with me, Beaker, so I'm not taking any credit for this because I said it to the trainer. The next day, he actually did fire Drew Bannister and pick up Jim Montgomery. And so Vic and I laughingly call that the Doug Armstrong move, the Doug Armstrong move. And I got to ask you, was this a Doug Armstrong move? Because clearly, like, you see something out there that you can upgrade. It's your job to upgrade as much as you can as a manager. So was this a Doug Armstrong?
Well, I don't know if it was a Doug Armstrong in this sense. I think there were certain things I met with every player, and you always go through the exit interviews. And I think, some of the feelings, some of the things that I came across, I think led me to make the change. And, certain things that, there's certain questions when you sit up top and you watch the game. And I think we started to wind down, I think that there were certain things, themes that were developing. And so ultimately, you meet with all the players and you have discussions, and, some of them are more, they're more direct than others. But I think that, which kind of ended up, me really taking a good look at the coaching and when I did make the move, I think that, my relationship with Joel in the past, and then just reaching out to him and starting a discussion. I think the hardest thing was just, going through and doing the due diligence of, the things that transpired in Chicago, and being comfortable in that scenario. And as well as, the Samuelis, they're great people, and they're very philanthropic people in our community, and having them, talk to Joel as well. So I think that, once we got comfortable with that, the hockey part of it was a no-brainer.
And has that been now followed in the area with an excitement, knowing that you have a coach that has been this successful with a lineup that has, quite frankly, a lot of balance in it between veteran leadership, the youth that you had spoken about before, and this, at least on paper, when I look at this lineup, this is a club that should make some great strides, and having Quenneville's experience behind that bench has to be another added ingredient to help get you into the playoffs in 25-26.
Well, I think one of the things that's really important is Joel has an incredible reputation amongst the players throughout the league. You talk to him, and I've talked to numerous players to get their feelings on Joel, and our players are excited about it. And so the other thing that comes into play, it's instant respect. There's this instant respect, and I think that leads to a lot of good things on the ice as well. So they know Joel's won a lot of championships, and that's instant credibility and instant buy-in from the player's perspective.
You and Neil both have that New York connection, and now you have 4 former Rangers on that lineup with the addition of Chris Kreider coming over last week, and he joins Jacob Trouba, Ryan Strome, Frank Vitrano. And there's got to be somewhat of a comfort factor there that these players all enjoyed success in New York, and they just bring that much more to your team now in Anaheim.
Well, I think it's certainly having Ryan Strome and Frankie, and then even Jacob Trouba come over. It made the trade, and the note that for Chris to waive his no trade clause to come to Anaheim. I think it made it a lot easier for him. And I think the other thing that's obviously the coach has made a big difference as well in Chris's decision. And I think that, where our team is, where we're looking to take that next step, I think that's exciting for players as well. So it's certainly, there's a lot of good feeling, a lot of excitement amongst the group. And I hope that translates into about 10 more wins.
Pat, with Jacob Trouba, and I watched him play an awful lot, and I really liked him with the Rangers, and I thought he was an element that the Rangers had that could scare the other team. Certainly you've got 2 of these guys now because your captain is also scary. But how long did it take Jacob to adapt to going from Manhattan to Anaheim?
Well, I think it probably took him about a month, really, just to kind of get a feel for the locker room, get a feel for how we were playing on the ice. Certainly, it's not easy to kind of go from one system to the next. We played a little different system than what New York played defensively, so there's always a little adjustments there. Fitting in is always a tough thing. It doesn't matter how old you are, the amount of games you played. Coming into a new group is always I wouldn't say difficult. It's just an adjustment that you have to make and start to feel comfortable. And I think, in a month, he certainly, he was, it took him to get, and then he became very well and played very well. And I think that, it really helped push our team, to stay in that playoff hunt for pretty much the whole season.
Do you find the adjustment for him was easier coming in not as a captain? Obviously, he's a former captain, but coming in, Gudas is already the captain there. And it just makes that adjustment that much easier when you come in. You don't have that title anymore, and you can just come in and play.
That certainly helps. I think, I think the underlying thing, Jacob is a leader. Like there's certain things that, and I brought him in to be a leader as well, former captain, and wearing a letter doesn't mean that you can't not be a leader. And so, and when I brought him in, I sat him down and we talked about that especially. And I think he just needed some time to kind of get to know guys. Obviously, he knew a few of the guys, but getting to know the guys helped. And I think the other thing, Anaheim's a different market in the sense of, I've played in New York and I know what it's like to play in New York. It's certainly, it can be a great experience. Everybody knows who you are. Anaheim's a little different. And so in the sense that, there'll be people that'll recognize you, but it's not as big as a distraction when it comes to you just being able to go out there and just play hockey. And I think that certainly you can live a quieter life in Orange County than in New York City.
You had spoken earlier about the youth with Terry, Gauthier, McTavish, Carlson, Lacombe, Minyakov. And I wanted to ask specifically about Trevor Zegras because Neil and I have spoken often on this show, and I'd maintain that one of the worst things that may have happened to him was the Michigan goal, because that's all he apparently was known for in his first couple of seasons in the league. And one transformation I saw during the second half of last year, after he came back from injury, was it appeared that there was a little bit more jam in his game than I had seen previous. Is this something that's sustainable for him?
Well, I think that he's a competitive player. He doesn't get enough credit for how competitive he is. I think the biggest, for Trevor, the biggest adjustments, he's never been asked to be, a little more physical, to win, to, pin and seal your checks when you forecheck. Those are all the details. If you're watching Florida, there's just even all their best players, they all do it. And so that's what it takes to win. And so, Greg Cronin demanded that of him, and so, to Trevor's credit, it's not easy for him, but he's working at it, and it slowly over time, if he continues to do it, it'll become a habit for him. And I think that, along with all the other abilities that he has with his, he has really good vision. He's obviously highly skilled. All of that will make him into more a complete player. And, and the other thing on top of it, he worked hard. He worked hard to understand, his responsibilities, defending. So, he still has work to do there, but he's making strides and improving. And I guess ultimately that's what you ask of your player, but you have to be, you're happy with that they're making strides to get better.
Pat, I got to ask you, and I know it's hard to answer these kind of questions, but I have to ask you anyways. Being a former GM, free agency's around the corner. Your team has a ton of cap space compared to other teams. You've got your own people you've got to sign or not sign, and McGinn and Fabry and others. And then you've got Mason McTavish, who's a RFA, and obviously you're going to have to re-sign him. Do you think the Ducks will be active, very active during free agency? And when I say that, I'm not asking who and what and how, but do you plan on being active?
Yes, I plan on making a lot of phone calls. Certainly, we have cap space that I'd like to see, how much we can improve the team. So we've met with our pro scouts already. We've kind of come up with a game plan, and it will be probably evolving, as it leads up to the, the July 1st. There's obviously a lot of work that gets done before the draft, even during the draft. So all of that stuff will be ready to kind of see if we can get some things accomplished there, and then and see where it leads to free agency. The goal has always been to kind of be active in free agency. Right now we're at a point where I really want to make the team better. I want to push, to get into the playoffs. It becomes hard mentally on teams if you keep losing. And I think that we're at a point now where we're able to push to start winning. And so that's kind of the goal for this club.
You're watching the finals as we have been, and these are two elite clubs, and they're at a spot that you're trying to get to. As you look at the makeup of the Panthers and the Oilers, what are the qualities that you most want to embody within your team as you continue to build this club?
Well, I think one of the things you look at, and can you go through any lineup that makes it to this point and not see every single player who competes at a 10? And you look at every player and they're willing to do what it takes to win. And that means blocking shots. That means, taking hits. It requires discipline. So there's a lot of things, but I think, the ability to compete and play with grit is important to reach this level.
Well, Pat, that's certainly what you did when you played, and your numbers are amazing. And the way you played the game was amazing with just what the things that you just said, with grit and determination and never give up and always trying to improve. And that was your career from the time you got to the league in New Jersey. You played in a day when everybody would have said, "Oh, he's too small. He's too small. He won't be able to play. He's too small." And you sure made those people wrong, very, very wrong. And there's a lot in your playing career. And I know it seems like a long time ago now to you, but it doesn't to me. You were a heck of a hockey player and a real asset to all those teams you played on. And of course, in Dallas, you won the Stanley Cup, and that's with Sergei Zubov and Doug Lidster.
Sergei,
two of your teammates there. And Doug Lidster, I think, was sort of like a older assistant coach type of player, but sort of in and
Doug
out.
Was
right?
my roommate actually. Yeah, Doug was my roommate there in Dallas. When we won. He gave me some great advice. He said, when you get the cup in your hands tonight, make sure you take off with it and lift it up high and take off with it. So that's what I did. Anyway, took off with it. So
Doug is a great guy. I get to see Doug once in a while when we have a reunion for the 94 team, and he's a wonderful guy. But we really appreciate you taking the time to come on here and talk about your club and the trades and all the different things that you've done. And we wish you luck this year. And you're definitely a team that's going to be pushing some other teams. And Coley and I always used to sit around and talk about who's going to miss the playoffs for somebody to get in. That's the other way. Is that it's fine to say we're going to push our way in, but who are you going to push out? That's that, right? That's the other question is, for everybody that jumps in, somebody's got to get back out again. And it's more difficult now than it's ever been.
Yeah, well, here's what I would say. Probably the most disappointing thing for me over last season, and I talked with the team about it after the season was over. The losses we had 3 losses to St. Louis, teams that we needed to beat. And these are all learning lessons. 3 losses to St. Louis. We had 2 losses to Calgary, and we had 2 losses to Vancouver. All the teams that we were in the hunt with and ended up losing those games that ended up costing us and falling. Those are the lessons that we have to learn this upcoming season and win the games that when it matters, you win those games. And so to me, that's a growing, that's a step in, your need to grow as a team. And it's no different than when I was in Dallas in 1999, when we won the Cup. 2 years prior to that, we finished my first year in Dallas. We finished second overall to Colorado, and I believe Colorado ended up winning that year. And then the next year, we finished. We won the President's Trophy, and we lost to Detroit. And then in '99, we ended up winning the Cup in '99. So but along those ways, our first year in Edmonton. We lost out to Edmonton in the first round after finishing second overall. And we had to learn how to deal with the pressure of expectations for the group to win. And the next year we ended up winning a couple rounds and losing the semifinals. So there's certainly growing that has to be done, lessons that need to be learned. And I think when I, meet with the team this fall, those will be some of the things that we talk about, winning the games that really matter at the time that they need to be won.
Well, again, Pat, thanks for coming on with us, and we look forward to the season and seeing the Ducks and how you do. You've made some exciting additions, both behind the bench and then also up front. I'm very familiar with Chris Kreider and his career in New York, and he's been a class act the whole time he's been in New York. I can tell you that. And he was a class act this season, by the way. When a lot of people wouldn't have been with the circumstance that he was put in. I wish him a lot of luck too, but you too, Pat, and thanks again for doing this. And it's really a lot of fun.
My pleasure, Neil. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Pat. And a reminder that our website is NHLWraparound.com. Our next Stanley Cup date will be Wednesday to recap the 6th game of the Stanley Cup Final between the Oilers and the Panthers. Our next NHL Wraparound will come early next week when Neil and I will be discussing UFAs and RFAs. So one season ends, the next season begins. But one thing that we are certain is that come next season, like ending this season, we will be wearing our shirts from Lugaroo.
That's for sure, because they'll last. We could be saying that we'll wear them next decade from Lugaroo because they seem to last that long, but they're great quality. I love this thing. This one that's got our logo on it is terrific, and I've got a number of different pieces of Colin Mulvey's apparel that are just terrific. They wear so well. You can literally do anything in them. If you have to sweat, don't worry about it. You can throw it in the wash and it comes out looking exactly as it does right here. So they're great products. Lugaroo, go to their website and check it out.
It's amazing how good you look week after week.
Well, that's because of Lugaroo and because of these stiff collars that I have here. They stay stiff.
And the snaps. Don't forget those.
And the snaps.
It's Lugaroo.co. LOOGAROO.co. You know, at the start of the conversation with Pat Verbeek, you had mentioned how much he has to admire that player because Verbeek was that same type of player. And you know that they also shared the same nickname.
Yes. Go ahead. I know it, so you can say it.
During the course of their careers, both Pat Verbeek and Brad Marchand have been referred to as the little ball of hate.
Yeah. And I'd be interested to ask Brad Marchand, who's from Toronto, or Ontario at least, and I think Toronto. Was Pat Verbeek one of his guys that he, tried to emulate in when he was playing? Because they are so similar in the way they play. And Pat Verbeek was a pain in the ass, just like Marchand.
Yeah.
But he was a pain in the ass, and then he'd score on you as well. So, and that's what Marchand does.
Career high 46 goals with the Devils and over 500 during the course of his career.
Amazing. And the penalty minutes, tons and tons of penalty minutes.
We're going to get more into Pat Verbeek's career during the human side of the story. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about Game 6 and the objectives for both teams. Because after what was a pretty lethargic fifth game performance by Edmonton, I believe that with the Panthers now on the verge of a second cup, they are at home. They don't have the advantage of having two home games to close out a series like they did a year ago in the final. This is the one that the Panthers are going to want to have. And I believe the first 10 minutes are going to be critical. And I think what we've seen through the first 5 games, we haven't seen any feeling out process. Both teams have gone for it relatively early. The Panthers obviously have had the edges because of the stats that we reported on earlier. But I think Oilers are going to probably be in survival mode early in Game 6.
I agree with you, and they're going to have to be in survival mode. They're going to have to be in fighting for their lives to try to get it back to Edmonton. But, that trip, I'm sure, has worn on the Florida Panthers going back and forth. And I'm sure their motivation, besides obviously wanting to win the Stanley Cup, but wanting to end the series and not have to go back that 3,000 miles to Edmonton, Alberta, and just be able to stay home and enjoy the accomplishments that they've had this season.
And you got to remember, in Game 5 last year, Panthers came home with a 3-1 lead. They had lost 8-1 in Game 4 to make that series 3-1. And the Oilers were able to play on top in that game. They were ahead 1-0 after the first period, 3-0 after 25 minutes of play. Panthers did get it to 4-3 early in the third period, but the Oilers were able to hang on. But the one thing that the Panthers do not want to do is get back on a plane. And conversely for the Oilers, we're going home anyway, so we might as well bring the Panthers with us.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly the way they will be looking at it. But as I said, the Oilers better get the lead. And if not the first goal, at least be winning going into one of the intermissions.
Something we talked about on Sunday was Chris Knobloch going to Calvin Pickard in Game 5. It turned out to be somewhat of a non-story simply because the Oilers were so lackluster in their game, and I don't think that you could really fault Pickard on any of the goals. Now the question is arise again. Stu Skinner or Calvin Pickard? Does Knobloch go back to his number 1 for Game 6 to try to save his season? Or does it not matter?
My bet is he goes back to Stuart Skinner. And I've been right on the first two. Remember when we've talked about this before, and we were talking about whether or not Skinner goes in or Pickard goes in, and then this one. I think he goes back to Stuart Skinner and gives him the chance to save the season for the Oilers.
But would you agree here that regardless of who plays goal, there needs to be more secondary scoring from this club? And we talked about it in the three things. That when the Panthers' third line is outscoring your third and fourth lines combined in this series, you need somebody to step up here to actually make the goaltending matter in this one.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where the loss of Zach Hyman is so critical, because you don't have that scoring threat out there. You have Corey Perry, which is fine. He's played good. I'm not knocking Corey Perry. For 40 years old, he's played great. But Zach Hyman is one of the weapons you really need in this series. He's a big weapon in the Oilers' arsenal, and he's not in the lineup, and I think this is where you really see it.
But they do have Evander Kane, who didn't play the entire regular season, had a pretty strong playoff for the first three series. And he has not played well in this final, either through production or taking a number of bad penalties. He's a guy that I believe if the Oilers are going to force a seventh game, his name is going to be on the score sheet and in a positive way.
Yeah, but you know what? In those other series, Vic, he wasn't playing the emotional, aggravating team like the Panthers, who make a science out of getting under your skin. And maybe it is that Evander Kane is more easily agitated to the point of doing things he shouldn't than he was in those other series when they sort of left him alone. And then he burned the other teams.
Last note here. Paul Maurice has the last change. Chris Knobloch has done a lot of shuffling with his lines. The most notable piece is when he puts McDavid and Draisaitl together. We had spoken yesterday that do you start them together to try to get a lead and then perhaps separate them if you are playing ahead?
Yeah, and that may be something he does to try to push the envelope early in the game.
Some other news from around the NHL. This coming out of Pittsburgh on Monday morning. While it remains unclear if Evgeny Malkin will retire following the 25-26 season, the Pittsburgh Penguins are not expected to offer him another contract with the franchise. Sources from within the Penguins organization has said. That came from the Twitter account of Josh Yeo, who we had on earlier this season. And I think this is a clear first sign of the dismantling of the big three in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's been for years. It's been just as it is McDavid and Draisaitl in Edmonton right now. For years, it's been Crosby and Malkin in Pittsburgh. I would doubt that Malkin will play anywhere but in Pittsburgh, but we'll see. I don't know him personally, and maybe I'm wrong.
Another 500 goal scorer, and certainly will be in the Hall of Fame at some point. Also, Nikolai Ehlers set to test the free agent market, this per Elliot Friedman. He was the 9th overall pick of the Jets in 2014 and has spent all 10 of his NHL seasons in Winnipeg. He has scored 225 goals, 520 points in 674 games. And when you look at the group of free agents that are out there, Neil, you have to say that Mitch Marner is going to be the most highly sought. And then behind that, it's going to be probably Sam Bennett and Ehlers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And these are good star players. So if they go elsewhere, there'll be an improvement. And we know Marner is going elsewhere, by the way. There'll be a pretty sizable improvement to the team that they land on.
Bennett is a different player than either Marner or Ehlers. And there is a thought out there that the clubs are certainly going to put their best foot out there to try to get Mitch Marner. But if they don't, it appears that Ehlers would be their second choice to try to obtain.
Yeah, well, they couldn't go wrong with the 9th overall pick in 2014. So, as I said, we're talking about first-line players and good players, and whoever signs them will improve their team.
Finally, the first 6 players for the 12 Olympic nations are being announced on Monday. The games will be in Milan, Italy from February 11th through the 22nd of 2026. This will be the first participation of NHL players in the Olympics since 2014 in Sochi. We're not going to talk about these players now, who's been named. It's not happening for 8 months. So it's just a news item, and we're going to leave it at that.
Please.
This is the human side of the story. Earlier in the show, it was our pleasure to have Anaheim Ducks GM Pat Verbeek joining us. And anytime I see a general manager that played for you at one time, I wonder what sort of Neil Smith hints and things that you've learned on the job, what you've passed on to them.
Well, I think most of them just basically watched and then did the opposite. And that's why they're being successful now. No, but Pat was a great player. He's doing a good job in Anaheim, did a good job in Tampa as Steve Yzerman's assistant GM, and did a good job in Detroit as a scout for the Red Wings. Did you know that he's one of the few NHL players to have scored 500 goals, but one of only four of those that are eligible, but they're not members of the Hall of Fame. So they're eligible to be in the Hall of Fame, but there's only 4 of them that have scored 500 goals or more, and Pat's one of them. He grew up in Ontario, in Petrolia, Ontario, which is a little town just beside Sarnia, Ontario. And Sarnia, Ontario, for those Americans that are listening, is at the border of Michigan, right across from Port Huron, Michigan. So that's where Pat grew up. At 15 years old, he played junior B hockey. 15. Wow. Like that's amazing. He was selected by the Devils 43rd overall in the 1982 entry draft, and he helped the Devils to their very first playoff berth in 88 when John McClain got that famous goal. Yeah. And he scored the club record of 46 goals, and that held until 2006 when Brian Gionta broke that record with 48 goals. Yeah. Something that I've always remembered about Pat, because it was one of a kind thing, he lost one of his thumbs, believe it or not, in a farming accident when it was cut off by an auger. And his dad and his brother were able to help save the thumb by rushing him to the hospital and having it reattached. And then he did extensive rehabilitation, of course, to make it so that he could continue playing. He got traded from the Devils to the Hartford Whalers in 88-89. And he led the team in goal scoring. And in his second year in Hartford, he was the team MVP. He was named captain of the Hartford Whalers. And then from there, he got traded to the New York Rangers. And here's an interesting one for you that I should have brought up with Pat on the air. When I traded a first-round pick for Pat Verbeek, that first-round pick ended up being Sebastien Giguère, who was the goalie for the Anaheim Ducks when they won the Cup.
Oh.
So Pat Verbeek was basically traded for the goalie who won the Cup for his franchise.
And who won the Conn Smythe in a losing effort for the Ducks when they lost to the Devils.
There you go. And that all came because I traded for Pat Verbeek, so I'm responsible for all of it.
I guess you are.
He signed with Detroit Red Wings after winning a Stanley Cup with the Dallas Stars. He went there in Detroit. He passed the 1,000-point mark. He scored his 500th goal and moved into the top 25 in career goal scoring before returning to Dallas for his final season in 01-02. You know, I didn't realize that he had been a color analyst for the Red Wings for a little stint right after his career was over. And then he started to work for Steve Yzerman as a scout And I think also for Ken Holland. Ken Holland was still there when he started as a scout. And then when Steve Yzerman went to Tampa, Pat Verbeek went with him to the Tampa Bay Lightning, and where he was named assistant general manager. And then in February 2022, he was named general manager of the Anaheim Ducks, which is the position that he still holds now. Another interesting bit of trivia. Patrick Kane. Yes, that Patrick Kane.
Yep.
Lived with Pat Verbeek and his family in 2003 after relocating to Detroit, Michigan to play for the Honey-Baked 16U team, AAA hockey team, and Kane credits Pat Verbeek as a mentor, and he even emulated his playing style. What a compliment that is to Pat Verbeek from Patrick Kane. So that's the wonderful career of Pat Verbeek, the hockey player turned hockey analyst, turned hockey scout, turned assistant GM, turned GM of the Anaheim Ducks.
I want to ask you a question about the GM role, but first, just to kind of tie up a loose end here, that the other 3 500 goal scorers, besides Verbeek, that are not in the Hockey Hall of Fame, Keith Tkachuk, Peter Bondra, and Patrick Marleau. So let me ask you here, because currently there are 13 general managers that have played in the NHL at one time or another. There are others that have played in the AHL, college hockey. But for a former player, the learning curve to understand the business and eventually end up as a general manager has to be different than people that have come from hockey operations side. I mean, we've got some unique stories out there also of Kyle Davidson in Chicago as an intern at the start of his career. We've got Kyle Dubas in Pittsburgh and Eric Tulsky in Carolina that are analytics people. So where do you see the difference for somebody that was a former player having to learn the business to the point that they are elevated and competent to the point they can assume a role of a general manager in the National Hockey League?
I think people like Verbeek and Yzerman are outliers. Normally, successful NHL players don't have the patience to learn the front office management and how it works and how you scout players and how you have meetings and how you cross over, meaning you may be living in the West, you have to see the players in the East. You may be living in the East, you got to go see the European players. They don't have the patience because they think that they should just go right into being GM and that it's not that hard. And Steve Yzerman and now Pat Verbeek are anomalies because they put their time into learning their craft. And I think that's what's really important. Somebody like myself, who was a college player who ended up starting out scouting and then continued scouting all the way through and many years in Detroit and then got the GM job, I already knew how it all worked because I'd been doing it for years. I think that's the difference. I think that a lot of times these ex-players don't want to put the time in that it takes to really understand how to run a team.
I know I'm getting a little bit off topic here, but you could also extend that to the coaching ranks, that how many superstars in the NHL have had genuine success behind the bench? And we can look at Wayne Gretzky. We can look at Patrick Waugh, who had moderate success at best.
Yes, and I think because everything comes so natural to those guys. They have this unbelievable talent that superstars do, that they use during their playing career, and they've never really studied the game the way guys like Joel Quenneville had to study the game, for example, who's become one of the winningest coaches in NHL history, but was just a run-of-the-mill defenseman in the NHL. And it's very hard for guys who have these natural abilities to really go and have a workman's understanding of the game because it just came so natural to them.
Pat Verbeek always worked hard as a player, and you could see it in his work now as a general manager. And we thank him for joining us today. This is our last wraparound of 2024-25 because when we come back in a week, we're already looking forward to next season. Can you believe it?
Yeah, so we're going into year 3 pretty soon. We started this endeavor in late January of 2024 with Wayne Gretzky. And here we are almost midway now through June of 2025. So it's been almost exactly a year and a half.
Time has flown and we have had fun doing this as well. So with that, we thank Pat Verbeek once again. Thank you to UBS Financial Services, Inc. NHL Wraparound and UBS Financial Services, Inc. are not affiliated. UBS is a sponsor of 3 things you need to pay attention to. No other affiliation, relationship, or endorsement is made, suggested, intended, or should be implied or inferred between UBS and VNS Productions, LLC, or any of the individuals or businesses and or their respective products and services appearing in this program.
And we want to thank all of you out there watching, listening. Send questions or comments either to nhlwraparound@gmail.com or to me, Neil, at nhlwraparound.com or Vic at nhlwraparound.com. This podcast is available on all platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Spotify, YouTube. And check out our complete catalog of podcasts that you can find on our website, nhlwraparound.com. So please subscribe, get your friends and family to subscribe, like us, and also check out some of the short clips we put up on the former Twitter, now X, where we are at NHL Wraparound. Stanley Cup date returns Wednesday with a recap of Game 6. We'll find out whether or not we're going back to Edmonton or the year is over. The next NHL Wraparound will be early next week as we look towards free agency.
Couldn't have said it any better.
I know.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.